Hello and welcome back to OT, the podcast. We're here to talk about watcher's time and how to spend it. I'm Andy Green.
I'm Felix Schultz. How are you, Andy?
I'm feeling well, Felix. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good. I'm excited to have our guest today. It's a little bit different for us. A little bit different for me. Maybe you're well across this world of investments of passion.
It's one of my favourite terms. It's probably my term of 2022.
Mate, that's the Oxford English Dictionary's new word of the year. We talk about investments of passion, which watchers definitely are a great example of, with a woman by the name of Michelle Ciesielski, who is the head of residential research at Knight Frank Australia. So a little bit left field of us talking to, property people. But
Well, it is and it isn't. So the reason Michelle came on was because Knight Frank sent over their wealth report, which is like an annual report where they look at the increase in investments. And this one's, I think, more geared towards ultra high net worth individuals.
yeah,
But it covered things like luxury property, cars, whiskey, watches, and some really interesting insights and takeaways.
we didn't really get into the private jet chat, but that was apparently another strong growth area.
Of course it was. But it's worth the listen because one thing that Michelle points out early on is that these ultra high net worth individuals tend to be the real trend leaders. So they start investing in stuff before everyone else, and us regular folk are very far down the line and sort of follow the trends that they set. So if you're interested in watches and investments of passion, then this is one to listen to.
See what the rich people's buying. In less ultra high net worth individual news, I've been doing some things.
Oh yeah, what have you been up to?
Well, I don't know if you remember this, but our former colleague Dan was, aside from being the man, he was a big Tom Hardy fan.
Massive, famously.
I think, his love for Tom ran deep and true. He hyped up a series called Taboo.
Oh yeah,
which I think is like 2017. Like I think it's like a little sort of 8-episode run, and it popped up on my Netflix. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'll give this a go. I've been in the mood for a bit of Tom Hardy, and I'm really into it. It's period drama, but not in the Pride and Prejudice style. It's very gritty, very dark. Lots of political machinations.
Sure.
It's very enjoyable. I would highly recommend it. The taboos at the moment are sort of fairly implied, but pretty R-rated.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I'm really into it. And Tom Hardy, he's incredible. Like I didn't really like him so much when I saw him early on, but his early roles, but he's just growing on me more and more as I get older, and I don't know.
Need someone to look up to. I'm 50-50 on Tom. I think half the time he's incredible, half the time he's not.
Yeah, well, he's very good. He's very sort of growling and gruff and all that sort of thing, but he does embody the role very, very well. But that's not all I've been up to.
Tremendous. Yeah, what else?
I've been, as you will find out, I've been doing some research about this week's sponsors, Edifice, which made me visit edificeaustralia.com.au. And this is an entirely organic plug because I saw something that ticked all the Felix boxes.
Okay.
It was in this sort of the banner on the site. It was a collection called the Heat Gradation Collection.
Okay.
And what I think Edifice have done here is found out a cool automotive masculine way of selling the fact that they've got really cool rainbow watches.
I love it.
So they've got like these they're sort of their chronographs, solar powered, all that jazz, but they've got details on them that have that like sort of rainbow heat anodized treatment, and they just look cool. So I'll put a link up. Check them out. I think they're pretty fun.
Yeah, a bit of PVD action or something.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll do, Andy, is a little bit of business news.
Yes.
As you know, I'm always paying attention to the AP Newswire, and Hodinkee has a new CEO.
They do.
Yeah, Toby Bateman was the outgoing CEO. He's ex Mr. Porter, and he's staying on as an advisor, apparently. But the new guy is Jeffrey Fowler, who comes from Farfetch.
Wow, interesting. So TB didn't last that long.
2 years transitional period. He was always based in London.
Yeah, it would have been hard.
And I thought, oh, that's a bold move. But as you know, I think they sort of was in charge of the Crown and Caliber buy. But yeah, we'll see what Jeffrey Fowler and his big online e-commerce can do. The other sort of top line news in that press release was that Hodinkee have done over 100 million in annual sales,
Wow.
which
It's a
is not
lot
a
of,
small number.
that's not a small number at all. But when you factor in that Crown and Caliber acquisition, it probably helps.
Bit of volume.
Bit of volume play. Oh, that's good. Good on them. Well,
What are you up to? Have you been acquiring any new CEOs recently,
I've been
Andy?
acquiring a new Netflix series called Bad Vegan.
Nice.
It's got 100% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Bad in what sense?
Naughty vegan. So it's a fraud. It's a classic fraud tale that's doing the rounds
Okay.
on Netflix.
The Tinder swindler of vegans.
Tinder swindler. Then we went to Inventing Anna, and now we're on Bad Vegan. And this is about a restaurateur and her husband kind of swindling investors and employees of, it was about $6 million.
Oh, right.
Now, it's interesting because they a few times they allude to him sort of spending, about 100K on luxury watches, and all the footage that they managed to kind of have of him to kind of intertwine into this docuseries. He's always wearing like a sea dweller. So it's real because, some of the embezzled money was spent at Rolex and I think Bayer. And that's a little bit interesting, but it's just a classic, fraud doco, I should say.
I'm a little. So what? But why is he bad and why is he a vegan? So what's the vegan?
So it was a vegan restaurant that the sort of the main protagonist Sama set up. It was very famous. A lot of celebs went there. Alec Baldwin somehow involved.
Sure.
And it was vegan. It was the first, I want to say, raw vegan restaurant in New York City.
Okay.
And possibly in the world. This is 15 years ago. So she was really setting the trend, did really well, and then met this guy who kind of took advantage of her, it seems, or maybe she was trying to con him, and maybe they're trying to con each other. You don't really know. But they ended up, just pulling a whole bunch of money out of the business, not paying any any tax on that, income tax, state tax, and leaving kind of employees in the lurch, as well as a few sort of investors.
Classic.
And then they went on the run for like 10 months. And the reason that they got caught was because she went out to pick up a pizza from Domino's and used, I think, her husband's real name. So some sort of watch list pinged off, and they went and collected them both, which was sort of why she got the title Bad Vegan, because, back then vegan Domino's probably wasn't a thing. So I think that was
that's what I was wondering. Like, I mean, you could probably get vegan Domino's. I seem to remember.
Yeah, you can. This is probably like 2012 or something, though.
Yeah,
and it wasn't for her; it was for her husband. So yeah, she's a good vegan, just a criminal.
Well, that's what I thought. I initially thought it was a documentary about a vegan that occasionally, sneaked milk in their coffee.
No, it's a classic fraud saga. So I recommend that. Do you know what else I recommend?
What do you recommend?
The Edifice EFV140D-3A from today's episode sponsor, Edifice Australia.
Yeah, it just rolls off the tongue. Now, this is not part of the thermal collection that I hyped up earlier. This is what I would say is a classic, good-looking knockabout sports watch.
I agree.
Much like I don't know, one of some great Australian cricket players. But unlike great Australian cricket players, you can have this one for $159, which is quite amazing.
Yeah, Felix. I mean, talk me through the aesthetic of this watch. What's it look like?
Well, it's a round steel watch. You're talking about 43.9 across, fairly slim at 10.8 high.
That's like lug, we should say, like the lug.
The Lux lug is 49, I think.
Yep. So it's
49 top to bottom, 43.9 across, 10.8 high on the wrist, which is fine. It it wears pretty well. I've been wearing it around for the last week. Mineral glass, quartz movement, 100 meters water resistance. Comes with a 3-link bracelet. Pretty classic design. Like, you've got a fairly broad polished bezel, some nice, sort of curvature on the flanks. Good stuff. But really what you want to be talking about here is the dial, Andy.
Yep.
It's got that classic sort of garage door horizontal striping. And the one we've been sort of rocking is a green galvanized finish, which, how does it look on the wrist, Andy?
Lovely. It sparkles in the sun. I really like the kind of generous loom plots. They're sort of really long, and the hands themselves is sort of an hour hand, which is really nice.
Yep.
The hands are a bit chonky as well at the base. The more you kind of look at it, have you
A
noticed
fat
that?
taper.
They have a really fat taper that kind of protrudes the other side,
Yep.
and a couple of red touches. So the second hand, and then just the depth rating on the dial, 100 meters water resistant. Really bit
Yeah.
of red and green. Bit of a classic combo, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this is good. Like, this is, I've been wearing it all week, and I've popped it on a NATO strap, and it's just a classic vibe. If I would say, this is my personal preference, I'd like that hour hand arrow a bit fatter.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
So anyone at Edifice listening in the design department, please make that happen for us. But really, again, $159.
Also, date will.
Oh, date will.
Date will. Don't forget that.
Solid piece of kit.
Yeah.
I really, this is again like, the sort of watch that you would either have as, maybe you're going somewhere sort of rough and tumble for the weekend. You don't want to, wear something from the regular collection. This would be a perfect addition. Or again, get it for someone in your life that, you're trying to get them over the line into a watch. I actually did that the other day. I gave someone a watch, haven't worn a watch in over 10 years. So
Yeah.
we'll see how that.
See if it sticks.
See if it sticks, and maybe we'll do an Edifice next.
Well, I mean, 16-year-old Andy, he would have loved this watch.
Yeah. 23-year-old Felix would probably love this watch too.
Yeah. I mean, I'm keen to see what strap you've got on as well, because I think it'll look quite nice.
It's a sort of a black and grey.
Oh yeah, that'll be good.
That sort of Bond stripe NATO. So
yeah, nice.
I didn't have any sort of matching green, so I just went pretty neutral. But I'll pop some pics on the gram. We'll have to check it out. We'll link it up and head to edificeaustralia.com.au to check it out for yourself.
Fantastic. Alrighty, Felix. Well, I think it is time to get Michelle from Knight Frank Australia on the line. Let's learn all about investments of passion.
They're the only kind I know. Today's guest is Michelle Ciesielski, Head of Residential Research at Knight Frank Australia, who, if you're not aware, are one of the world's largest global property consultants. And Andy, today we're chatting to Michelle because Knight Frank have recently released their wealth report for 2022. And when a copy came through our email, it turns out that people like spending money on watches and investing in watches. So we thought we would get Michelle's take on it because, frankly, she's a lot more qualified on investments than we are. Welcome to OT. How are you today, Michelle?
Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm doing really well.
The first question I sort of got is there's a particular acronym that shows up a lot in the old Wealth Report 2022, and that is a UHNW for ultra high net worth individuals. What does that sort of person look like in Australia in 2022?
That is a very good question because our wealth report is very much based around an ultra high net worth individual. At Knight Frank, we define someone in this cohort as having 30 million US of net wealth. So that includes their family home as well. So this population, just to put it into perspective, we've got about just shy of 21,000 of these ultra wealthy people in Australia. They grew by just over 10% in 2021. And quite interestingly, we're not just talking to the capital cities here necessarily. We know that Sydney certainly dominates where our ultra wealthy population live, and Sydney holds 25% of this population. But some interesting stats that came out were that outside of the four major capital cities, this population actually grew by just over 13% compared to the capital cities at 8%. So we are actually talking right across Australia when we're looking at this ultra wealthy population in terms of growth.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I mean, great to know, Felix. I think we're a little bit off the mark of ultra high net worth. But
I must admit, as a researcher, I'm not there either, but they're certainly our clients, and we know that their wealth has grown over recent years.
Well, that's a positive. So we got the executive summary as well of this wealth report, and what's in there is a snapshot of sort of what these individuals are spending their money on, and a couple of dot points jumped out to us, and one in particular was Wine made up 16%, watches was 16%, and art was 13% in terms of the best performing luxury collectibles in 2021, so last year. Does your experience back up these numbers?
Yeah, looking at our Knight Frank Luxury Investment Index takes 10 luxury assets, and basically we revalue them every year. So yes, we've actually seen watches somewhat rise up the ranks in terms of performance. I guess last checked in mid last year, and we saw that watches were second best performing, and we basically saw it at 5% growth, and that was just behind wine at 13%. So that was mid last year. Back a year ago, the end of 2020, watches ranked fourth best with 5% growth. So they've actually seen quite a consistent growth in the collectible of a watch as an investment. But yeah, to actually rise up the ranks over the last year to be at 16%. It's almost like people are almost going back to the office, and they've got that watch, and it's certainly appreciated in the last year in particular. But yeah, look, it's a very interesting, I guess, time that we've had over the past years. It's almost a situation where people were, in my mind, from an investment point of view, sort of focusing on really close to home. So we saw, a lot of activity in the art space, and interestingly, wine as well, but also the cars as well. Those that were not traveling overseas, they were essentially here in Australia, and whether they were traveling by car to their family home, their second home that they were treating as a holiday home, which is somewhat turned into what we're calling a co-primary home. But they really upgraded their vehicles to travel in style. So that's certainly something that we've seen, I guess, over the past 2 years, that a lot of attention has been placed on the home and those investable assets that add value when in the home.
Yeah, interesting, as opposed to, I guess, an overseas holiday where the money just kind of goes into another economy. One term that I like, and I'm probably going to steal from this report, is investment of passion. I'm curious what that is and when it came about.
Yeah, look, we've referred, there's certainly passion investments. We almost like to, in terms of giving a really good detailed look at this ultra wealthy population. The reason why, I guess we do have so much emphasis on that is that, the level of wealth, this wealthy population, they have, quite a huge influence over not only the property markets, but obviously the luxury asset markets as well. So, we tend to look at, the wealth creation. We know that they invest in property. We know that they also invest in passion. So, investments of passion is certainly born out of that. And quite interestingly, when we look at the numbers around collectors, we know that from an allocation of investable wealth, about 16% is allocated to these investments of passion. So when we are looking at how much is actually being spent on these investments of passion over the past year in Australia, we actually asked our ultra wealthy clients, and 51% said that they actually increased their spending on a collectible. When we compare that globally, that global number's 25%. So Australians have certainly been spending up in this space. Especially when we're talking over the last year, it was 51%, but the year before that it was 33%, and then prior to the pandemic it was 29%. So there's certainly been, I guess it's probably just because where we're located, there's that extra time to travel, but that time has been, I guess, well spent in terms of not only creating wealth but preserving wealth and investing in wealth, investing in assets that can create more wealth for this population.
Fascinating. I just wouldn't mind stepping back away from the investments of passion for a second. there's sort of at the end of this wealth report, there's a whole sort of suite of data on, wealth growth across the world. And Australia is looking really, really good with, you surveyed private bankers, 97% of them said that their clients' wealth increased in 2021 and 91% expected to keep increasing in 2022. What's fueling this?
Oh, look, certainly a lot of, there's pretty much, we could take it down to the fact that if you owned any type of asset in 2021, you did really well, whether that's property to investable luxury to commercial property, whatever you've invested in. We certainly saw growth across almost every asset class. So even, I guess, taking the conversation outside of the things that you can touch, but the equities market, we essentially saw really good performance in the stock market. So I guess all these things combined, it was almost like in 2020 we saw people with all the uncertainty with the pandemic, almost not there were some markets that certainly panicked, but people held on to their money. And then what we saw in 2021 was that people sort of invested their money, and over that time, property prices increased, quite significantly in this prestige space. So, all that combined, we know that our ultra wealthy population had more money to spend through this time.
Fascinating. And I mean, knowing the watch category quite well, I think Felix and I can both, vouch for the growth that you've seen over the last year and a half or so within sort of valuations and interest in the hobby, and definitely kind of noticing that the trends align here. So I guess the follow up to that is, do you think that financial services, property services, et cetera, need to sort of adapt to this sort of changing and growing investment category? We commonly hear people having issues finding services for things like insurance and security systems, et cetera, to meet the needs of these personal collections. But if it sounds like this is something here to stay.
Yeah, look, that's a really good point. And I guess you could even take it, a step to the side and look at, the auction houses. And we know that watches, I guess, was once seen as a gateway to selling the art, but we now know that they almost stand on their own now in terms of the auction houses. So, look, you're right. The insurance around all of these luxury assets are pretty important. I guess something that we did notice throughout the pandemic, like I sort of said, there was a focus on luxuries that were attached to the home. And what we're finding more and more of those, despite, still significantly increasing over the last year and over the last 10 years as well. But there's, I guess, less opportunities to somewhat house and showcase these luxuries. And I guess an example of that is that we're seeing, quite a significant trend towards wealthy people have the family home, and there's essentially a lot of wall space within these homes. They're quite big, and there's an opportunity to show off their art. But when you come to a situation where we're seeing a lot more people looking to downsize, or we call it right sizing here at Knight Frank, where people basically want to have almost the same size house, but up in the sky without the upkeep of maintenance of the pool and so forth. They still want all those amenities, but they want someone else essentially to look after them. And this trend was certainly growing before the pandemic, and without a doubt, as borders reopen, people are traveling again.
Yep.
This is certainly a suitable product for them. But it does actually create a situation where they don't have as much wall space to display their art. Another example is having the family home with a 5 or 6 car garage to house cars. Moving to this new way of living, there's not necessarily, especially if you're going to be living quite close to the CBD, there isn't exactly ample parking a lot of the time, so people have to park off site. So it's not so much of having people over and possibly sharing the experience of sitting in their new whatever car they've just purchased recently. For them to be off site, it does create that distance, I guess, to share the experience with their family and friends. I guess you could even extend that to the wine cellar. that, as people do reevaluate the way they live, as much as people are looking for more space to live in, there's only so much room for that extensive wine cellar. So again, people are looking at different options to house their assets. So when we're looking at watches, I guess there's that, not necessarily a huge amount of space that needs to be taken up, when you do correlate that to the home. So, look, it's really fascinating monitoring these trends, year after year.
Yeah, I think it absolutely is, and that makes a lot of sense about investing in things that sort of fit within your lifestyle. And there's certainly obvious benefits to having an investment that you can wear on a daily basis or come home and look at on the wall. Are there any risks with this sort of luxury investment opposed to more traditional categories, or are there cycles that people that might be sort of getting into this in a serious way need to be aware of?
Yeah, look, we have a great opportunity within the Wealth Report to ask these, ultra wealthy people who do, some of them, invest significantly more than that 16% that's the average. But we do get to ask the question about why they collect. And quite interestingly, number one, not only in Australia but around the world, is the joy of ownership. So that's, I guess, from the joy there comes emotion, and sometimes sometimes risk isn't necessarily viewed in the same way as something else. If it's, you're quite emotionally tied to that passion, investment. And then when we sort of said, what else, why else do you collect? Having a safe haven for those assets is super important as well. But it doesn't overtake the joy of the ownership. And then, the third is their investment return. So that, interestingly, in Australia, we sort of stack up to what the global trends are in terms of those three. So the joy of ownership, safe haven, and then the investment return. But when we, because it is a global survey, when we broke down the data for the countries and territories in Asia, investment return actually ranks the highest, followed by joy, and then a safe haven. So look, without a doubt, we certainly know of these collectibles that people will buy on a whim or didn't expect to go out that day and come home with a car or a watch. But at the same time, we also know that a lot of, I guess there's quite a generational shift in buying these assets as well. And I no doubt you've seen that with watches, where perhaps, buying a watch, you'll have, parents taking their child to purchase their first watch, and that experience is sort of, being in the boutique and, hand picking, or, making a bespoke piece that, speaks to them. That's super important. But then you've also got that other element where you don't necessarily need the parents to take you anymore, because there's options online, social media, so forth, where you can do a lot of research beforehand. And we know that this younger generation coming through, are doing that certainly with watches, but there's other asset classes as well. They're very, they're educated and they're very well researched before they make that purchase, and they want to make sure that there is going to be a return on that, I guess, down the line. So, it's certainly still an emotional attachment, but not as much, I think, as what we've seen in past generations.
Yeah, and maybe it's that sort of multi-faceted approach to it of like, well, it's an investment and I also can wear it. It's very easy to justify, I think, a lot of these items that come up in the report when you kind of start rationalizing it from, multiple angles. So the report revealed that luxury investments have seen that 123% increase over the last decade. I'm curious how this stacks up against other categories and typical returns that are sort of seen more broadly.
Yeah, look, again, because we've had the opportunity to revalue this basket of 10 luxury investments, or assets, over the past 10 years, we actually saw that, yes, the average was 123%, but the the one that stood out the most over the past 10 years was rare whiskey,
Yes.
with 428% growth over the past 10 years. And that was followed by cars. There's classic cars, 164%, and then the wine with 137% over the past 10 years. So watches actually ranked fourth best performing over that time with 108% growth. So I guess being a property person, I always like to put that into perspective in terms of the property market. Yeah. So when we look at that 123% over the past 10 years, the prestige property market, so that's what we consider to be the top 5% by value in every market. Yep. That actually grew by 51%. So whoa. Collectibles, 123%, prime property, 51%. And that basically covers the cities, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, and the Gold Coast.
So what you're saying is I should continue buying watches and not property.
You're on the right track there. But then over so basically, over the past 10 years, watches, fourth best performer. With 108%. But a really interesting stat that came out just over the last year, we've certainly seen really strong property growth in our markets. And looking at those 5 cities that I mentioned, the Gold Coast performed the best. We saw 17% growth in prestige property on the Gold Coast over the last year. But then, when we combine the property market and the collectibles all together, Gold Coast came out on top over the last year with that 17%. But then watches, wine, and the Sydney prestige residential market all recorded 16% growth. So to think that, your watches somewhat appreciated at the same rate that the Sydney prestige residential market has, I think just goes to show, how much people are valuing, watches.
Good to know. So you mentioned the rare whiskey was sort of up around 400% and was the number one performer. I'm really curious why rare whiskey is so popular and has been for a few years a genuine investment.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for that to be the 10-year growth, there's been a few different things with rare whiskey. Certainly, the broader market has remained resilient over the past 10 years. What we've seen, I guess, is the rise of Asian investors in rare whiskey in recent times. And as we sort of have seen, in the last, looking at the supply chain, we've certainly seen some interruption there. Having that supply-demand equation out of kilter, I guess, that certainly has influenced price appreciation for rare whiskey. We saw, prior to the pandemic, more flights from, the Chinese mainland to Scotland because there was just a rising attraction to that whiskey. And obviously, the rarer it is, the pricier it becomes. But that's certainly something that we've noticed over the past 10 years. But also, we've seen similar to watches, we've seen the age point fall for collecting as well. So we've seen a much younger population attracted to this investment class.
Interesting. I can certainly imagine people, listening to this podcast and using it to justify watch purchases as sound financial investments, comparing it to the property market and other traditional categories. Should you always view luxury items as investments, how should you treat something like a watch or, a whiskey differently if it is for investment purposes and not for consumption, say?
Yeah, look, it's super important that you know about what you're investing in. That whether it's wine or even whiskey. It needs to be stored correctly at an artwork. We're dealing with an appreciating asset value that really needs to be maintained. So I think there's two camps. There's certainly those that are buying just purely for the investment side of things. And, I guess just looking over the last 10 years, it has proven that, that there can be quite some significant growth through the different asset classes. We also include things like handbags and jewelry, coloured diamonds. We also see quite a few fluctuations in the diamonds as well. So even though, we've got our solid performers that we've, mostly spoken about on this chat so far, there are a few others that we know sort of somewhat bounce around from year to year. So, then there's the other group that are purely purchasing them to, engage with their family and friends and business colleagues. And I guess we probably saw more consumption over the past 2 years because we saw more people entertaining at home. So that sort of meant too that they may needed to tap into the wine cellar where they might not have otherwise if they were dining out or having a different experience. But most collectors tend to know why they're buying that, whether it is to preserve and to pass on to the next generation perhaps, or it is to I guess add to their lifestyle.
Yeah, awesome. Very, very fascinating topic to kind of dive into. So I think the last sort of really detailed question I have for you is, do you think that the growth that we've seen, specifically last 5-10 years across these luxury sectors is actually sustainable? And if not, where do we kind of draw the line?
Yeah, look, I guess we do draw a lot from in saying that, our ultra wealthy population do tend to lead the way in terms of trends and so forth, and the fact that we know that they're sort of increasing their proportion of investable assets towards collectibles. They're obviously investing more than what they have in the past. But some other things that we do need to be mindful of. Over the last 12 months, we've also seen not only the investment in collectibles rise, but we also saw that through, I guess, from a result of the pandemic, that philanthropic activity also increased in Australia. So we saw that actually rise 57%. So that was essentially ahead of the collectors. So although people have, gone into that the collectors space, we also know that, I guess that the passion side of things and giving back is certainly important to this ultra wealthy population. So to know that our philanthropic activity increased by 57%, globally that was only 37%. So there's certainly competing causes that are drawing the attention of our collectors. So that's something that I guess needs to be put into perspective, just to know where we are in the world. There's still a lot of uncertainty, and that may have shifted from a pandemic to I guess global unrest. That's something we need to consider going forward. But when we look at over the long-term play, those that are looking to put their cash that I guess has been created over the past 24 months, if it's not property, they are looking at other avenues to invest in. So it really does come back to the individual and the way that they feel they need to preserve their wealth.
Okay, so keep buying watches. Got it.
that's the takeaway there.
Got it.
Michelle, that's really really insightful. A look into what sort of makes the top tier of Australian and the world's wealthy people tick, to keep it watch related. And of course, we'll link up the Knight Frank Wealth Report in our show notes. So if anyone wants to sort of have a proper deep dive into it, we can make that happen. One last question, though, and this is perhaps the trickiest one. It's a little bit off topic, or maybe not. Is there anything that you would recommend to people listening to this, either to sort of find out more about this sort of, the statistics of wealth around the world, or just anything good you've been watching on Netflix recently? So maybe a personal work double recommendation.
Well, I must admit, like the Wealth Report we work on for quite a few months in the lead up to the release. So I haven't watched too many things on Netflix, that's for sure. But I do need to get up to speed with Billionaire, because I think if you just, watched even a couple of episodes, you can kind of understand how, easy, I guess, wealth can be distributed in different ways. But I think, I guess, a space to watch is the NFT space. And I mean, I know that, we're talking about art being purchased in this way. We know that, Penfolds are considering a wine to, in this space. A whiskey. I'm not so sure about watches. So
it's happening.
It's happening. Yeah.
Happening.
Yeah.
So you're already onto that trend. But there's a lot of. It's quite interesting being a property person. I like to touch and feel things. And I was a little taken back when we really we've really gone deep into the digital space in this year's wealth report. And I thought, oh goodness, I really need to understand more. But there's actually a lot of information throughout the wealth report, and without a doubt, if we're talking about property being, a block of land being purchased online that you can't stand on, without a doubt, we're going to be talking about that in this luxury space more and more as the years go on. So, and obviously, as we know, our ultra wealthy population, we know that 14%. Self-made and under 40 years. We know that they are keen to invest in this space. So, like I said earlier, they tend to lead the market, our ultra wealthy population. So, I think this is going to be a very fast-moving space.
Yeah, a bit of a roller coaster, I think, coming up. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful chatting to you, and I'm sort of going to reconsider my asset portfolio, that's for sure. Michelle, fascinating discussion about the ins and outs of investments of passion. Andy, we need to thank Edifice Australia for making this episode happen. What else do we need to do?
We need to plug our Discord, because we haven't done that this episode, so we'll link that up in the show notes. It's a fun place to be. It's where you can talk to Felix and I directly. Of course, if you want to email us about any other investments of passion, otthepodcast@gmail.com, or on Instagram, ot.podcast.
Exactly. And of course, like, subscribe, and all that YouTube stuff. Click like below. I don't know. We don't do that. But
share it around, tell your friends. Yeah. If you've got an edifice you want to send us, do it. I can pretend to be 16.
Yeah. All right. Andy, I'll chat to you later.